Welcome to the interviewing portion of the employment module. This is sponsored by CalTAP and presented by Swords to Plowshares. We're going to be going over preparing for an interview, the interview process, and then following up on the interview. In preparing for an interview, you're going to want to research the company and industry in advance so you can ask informed questions about the job and the company. You're also going to want to rehearse the questions and answers, find out dress expectations, and then go over your resume and cover letter that you sent them. Now, this is important because they want you to be engaged. They want you to have been thoughtful. You're not just showing up and having a conversation about a job that you don't necessarily know anything about or a company that you necessarily know anything about. You want to be able to ask meaningful questions and be able to have that dialogue. Not necessarily be long-winded or arbitrary questions, but it's important to have a meaningful engagement that your interviewers can leave with the memory of it and having you stood out as an interviewee. Rehearse those questions, rehearse answers that you might have. You don't want to go on like a 10-minute spiel. You don't want to give a short response either. I've definitely have seen interviews where the candidate gave maybe a one-word response or a one-sentence response, and that is definitely something where your interviewer is going to leave that, and that's going to reflect poorly, especially if it doesn't necessarily answer the question or give an elaborate thing. They're going to feel like you were just short during that conversation, and it's going to weigh down. But on the flip side, it's also bad to go on tangents and ramble, and they will also remember you as being a rambler. So it's about finding that sweet medium of being able to give poignant, meaningful responses that are an appropriate length of time. Finding out dress expectations is also important. For this particular job, I remember I was all clean cut, suited up, walked in, and one of the first comments right off of my director's back is that she should have warned me that this wasn't necessarily a suit atmosphere. I didn't know. She took it as she had failed to warn me, fortunately, and so there wasn't a negative part on that. And it was, in the end, better to be overdressed rather than underdressed. But especially within the state of California, and if we're thinking of places like the Bay Area, or we're thinking of more city areas, business dress and how that's worked in interview dress has changed substantially different. And then there might be certain jobs where it's not a professional environment, it's not a suit environment, so showing up in a polo and slacks also might be appropriate. It's also weird to kind of try and find out about that. Sometimes it's just like, oh, hey, like, how do you ask what's an appropriate outfit to wear for this kind of job? In the sense of you don't want to come off like you don't know anything or that you're an amateur or anything like that. But you could always pose a question of, what does your company consider business attire? And seeing kind of how they respond based off of that. And so that way, kind of having the idea of what you should go and looking like. And then go over your resume and cover letter that you sent them. If you created a targeted resume, or maybe you made some quick edits before you sent that off to them, and they bring up something and it's completely left your mind, or maybe you wrote something specific in the cover letter and they reference that, and you're sitting there blinked and you're like, I am totally forgetful, or like, I don't remember this, that could negatively reflect on you as well. So just give yourself a quick refresher before you go in. Now, the types of interviews that you might face are one-on-one interview, that's usually with the supervisor or manager. Panel or committee, two or more, either supervisor, HR, or two higher ups. This is definitely becoming a bit more normal in the type of interviews. We also want to think about a meal interview, which, depending on certain jobs you might have, they definitely may want to interview you while grabbing food, while grabbing dinner. You want to watch out, though, because this is the type of thing where they're trying to gauge you for being casual, for getting you in that comfort zone and seeing how you talk while you're in that comfort zone. Because if you get too comfortable, you might end up screwing yourself over. Group as well, these I haven't necessarily seen too much in professional environments, but they're also still a thing where you have multiple applicants. either dealing with one manager or panel style interview, that could feel a bit awkward because you might be feeling competitive with other people, even if the role itself isn't necessarily competitive. But that's something that could be off-putting depending on your personal comfort level. Phone interview is easy. That's also normal. Video and teleconference interview is also becoming a lot more normal and casual, especially if you're applying to a job that's long distance. For these things, phone interview, make sure you're in a place where you don't have outside sounds potentially interrupting or screwing you over. Last thing you want to do is be caught in traffic and trying to have a phone interview. Or when it comes to a video and teleconference, make sure maybe you tidy up the area and know what your webcam is seeing, because that could also be a problem. Maybe you decided to not clean up after yourself, or maybe you're, not entirely in formal attire or something like that. Or let's say you have cats or dogs wandering in the background, or children. These are different things that could definitely interfere with your interview. It could also be a good gauge, though, of like, hey, cat just walks in during an interview screen and your employer happens to be cat people. That could be a nice break in conversation. You don't want to rely on that. It's just something to keep cognizant of and something that you want to keep aware of, because when you're having that, you're inviting that person into whatever your space you're having that video or teleconference in. Now going on to the interview process. In the interview process, it's important that you establish good first impressions. First impressions are important in the sense of they do create a long-lasting impact, and if you were to create an error or mistake or just absolutely jeopardize first impressions, that can be a really, really difficult thing to work back from, especially since the interview process is essentially rapport building. You want to keep your answers short, but you want to also keep them thorough as reasonable. You don't want to get long-winded. You don't want to go over the top in your responses. You don't want to be too short, but you want to be able to be direct and answer the question as necessary. It's totally fine to take a moment to respond. You should not feel compelled to have an immediate answer for a question that an interviewer might have. You can take a few seconds and think about it. You can deliberate on it. That's absolutely fine. And if they hold it against you, that's more of a question on the employer than that's a question on you. Also, try to relate your skill set to the position that you applied for. It's great if they mention certain things or stuff relevant to the job, or if they ask you questions that are relevant to the job, and you can directly attest to experiences and skills that you already have and cross that over. Of being like, oh yes, I've gone through a similar situation where this happened and this is how I was able to solve this, or this is what I did as a part of my workload. Or I've already done something like this in this specific workload. This isn't a new thing to me. This is something I've experienced about. If you're able to draw the line from things that you've mentioned on your resume or in your cover letter directly to the questions and everything that you've applied for, that's big. Also, don't try to push that you can do the job rather than explain how you would do the job. I once heard of that an employer is not necessarily looking for a person that already has that skill set. While that's great and everything, and that's important, they're looking for ability and they're looking for potential. They're looking for somebody that can improve within that workspace. So rather than just you trying to be like, oh, I'm totally capable of doing this job, elaborate your thought processes. Elaborate how you can adapt to certain things. Elaborate how flexible your skill set is. Because they might want to incorporate new things within that job. They might want to know that you're somebody that is capable of growth and capable of really thinking things out. So rather than just being like, yeah, I can already do it. How do you do it? How would you do it? Be mindful of how you speak. That's also important. You don't know the HR people interviewing you. You don't know the employer interviewing you. You don't necessarily know the culture of the workplace or your coworkers. So, and especially as veterans, we have a certain way of talking which amongst veterans can be fine, and while we're in the service can be fine. Within a civilian environment, though, and within civilian interviewers, it can come off as aggressive or assertive. And so we do have to tone ourselves down. And especially a lot of us kind of got like this education of the civilian world from people who hadn't been in the civilian world for like quite a few years. It's definitely toned down more. And something that I've encountered with HR people is a problem that they have experienced in interviews with veterans is veterans can be really assertive or over the top to a point that it makes them uncomfortable. And if it's making them uncomfortable, they're imagining how you would make other people in that working space you could be in also uncomfortable. So be mindful of that. Keep an eye out for nonverbal cues. We're already trained to kind of identify and read nonverbal language. Really utilize that in this context. If your interviewer seems uncomfortable, if your interviewer seems disinterested, if your interviewer seems like, let's say you may have said something or you related something and they seem to kind of have a weird response about it, it's not like you can just be like, why are you responding that way? Or did I do something wrong? Like that can kind of make the process even more awkward. Use it as a moment to kind of self-reflect of, what did I just say, or what did I just do, and try and analyze that. You're also kind of already in a stressful situation, so that might catch you up more during the interview process, but be wary of it and be deliberate. Don't feel like you're rushing the interview, like they're taking time out of their day to interview you. So be deliberate, take your time, observe nonverbal cues, and try and use that to gauge how you're interviewing with them. Balance between talking and listening. It's important that when they're saying something that you make it clear that you're hearing them, reiterating even potentially something they say, and making it feel like it's not just a question and an answer, but that the interview's a dialogue. Ask questions. This is a huge one. I have seen people go into an interview, not have questions lined up, or maybe they'll only ask like one question. If it's one great question or one good question, that can be fine. But you should be able to have questions that are specific to the job that maybe you already had beforehand, or questions that you picked up during the course of it. So you could be like, is this position as a result of growth at the company? Are you just looking to bring more people on? Are you looking to fill this space? Like, let's say the person had resigned before, just being like, is somebody being replaced in this position? You don't necessarily need to like ask why, but then you can also be, if other people have already filled a role. So let's say you're entering a job where there's 2 other people who are already working that job. You can question about what are they seeking to complement on people who are already on staff, or what they would like for a new hire to be able to bring to that table, and what they're looking for in a candidate. These questions give them the understanding that you're fully aware of the role, how you're consciously thinking about participating in the role, and creating kind of an engaging thing where this employer can look at you and be like, okay, this person's serious about this. They're consciously thinking about this before they even got into this position. And they're obviously invested compared to the person who's like, nah, I don't have any questions, after giving a series of really, really short comments. And then in closing, when the interview comes to an end, you can ask what next steps are. Often they'll say something like, okay, we'll try and get back to you in like a week or 2 or something. And you can ask them about what the timelines are, and is it okay to follow up on the position in a week? Really basic questions, really easygoing questions. It's a dual purpose of, hey, you are invested in this, you finished the interview, this is something that you still want to do, that you're excited in, and that you can see yourself fitting in those shoes. But by knowing the timelines and knowing to follow up, that can give you an indicator of, hey, we'll try and get back to you in like 2 weeks. Okay, it's been week 6 now. You don't know necessarily if they are going to get back to you, but they said that it's okay to follow up with them. Okay, you could follow up with them. So it's just a nice, neat way to wrap it up. After having wrapped up the interview process, let's talk about the interview follow-up. So, interview follow-up. Send thank you notes, preferably the same day, maybe make a quick reference to, some things that were said like in the meeting. Keep it short. Just a few sentences is fine. Just send them an email. Evaluate yourself. Do you remember names and the people? That's important because if you're going back in, it might be awkward to be like, I forgot so-and-so's name. Were you timely? Did you show late to the interview? Do you think that's going to be a problem? Did you show up early? Did you dress appropriately? Is that going to be weighed against you if you did or didn't? Is there additional information that they requested from you? Maybe they're seeking to further verify you, or maybe the position needs to get something that validates what type of training that you've had, or maybe they're interested in you completing a second portion, such as a writing portion for an interview process. How are your answers? Think about the questions that they asked you, how confident that you felt about the ways that you responded, and then how did they receive you on top of that? Did they seem like they were enjoying the conversation that they had with you? Did they seem like they were bored about you and not necessarily invested in you as a candidate? The reason why you want to evaluate yourself in this manner is, you might not get this job, and you want to be able to go into the next interview better and having learned from that prior one. Now, when we talk about evaluating, negotiating job offers, let's say you went through the interview, banged it out of the ballpark, and these people decided that they want to make you a job offer. Let's talk about the components of a compensation package. Pay, obviously. Benefits, such as medical, dental, vision, tuition. 401k or retirement contributions. Stock or profit sharing. Transportation allowance. Now, it's important to see this as a whole package and not necessarily just a salary amount or minimum wage amount. Because maybe you have two jobs that are vying for you. You have one at 60,000 and maybe one at, 55,000, right? But then let's say the one that's at 55,000 is offering a way better health insurance package, way better medical, dental, vision. Let's say they also are willing to give you reimbursement fees for tuition, or if you want to take a class. Let's say that 401k is significantly better. Let's say they match your 401k, or they even give you stock options or profit sharing, or they might even allow a transportation allowance. These things, even though, the salary might be lower, great healthcare is worth thousands of dollars comparatively, just even talking about that alone. Same thing when we talk about 401k, and same thing when we talk about stock and transportation allowance. Is all these different components matter. And then not just that, but when you're actually negotiating these offers, sometimes you don't even necessarily need to negotiate for a salary increase, or maybe a salary increase isn't something that is viable. So, let's say you've got a few job offers, and it could be like, hey, I really, really want to take this job. This other job is offering a higher salary, and seeing how to approach it of, offering either a salary increase or potentially working on other benefits. Even though it's not listed here, we can also mention sick days or vacation days. Maybe they can give you more of either of those, which time is worth money. Getting you more vacation days can be a really great thing. Transportation allowance, depending on where you're at, transportation is expensive. If they offer you a parking spot, that can make life way easier rather than having to rent out for a parking garage. These are all little things and important components of when we talk about a compensation package and what you want to look for when you're evaluating negotiating job offers. It's also important to research the salary and benefits of the position in your area. Maybe the salary is lower at the job that you applied to because they might be a nonprofit. And even though there's a direct equivalent job within a for-profit industry, there's a reason why the salary is lower when it comes to nonprofit. In turn, benefits might still be really fantastic. Or the experience and opportunity or passion of working at a nonprofit might be important to you. You can find these things out on websites such as Glassdoor, and it can help give you a better idea, especially if you're evaluating or negotiating these job offers. As a side note, let's say you already have a job. Researching the salary and benefits of a position in your area can be great if you are arguing for advances in your current salary or benefits. It's important to acknowledge, though, let's say if we're looking at, private industry, and you've got two similarly identical roles and there's a $15,000 difference. That's something that you can also bring up. Sometimes, honestly, maybe the people that were hiring for that position didn't do their due diligence of having researched for that role. Maybe they have a completely different reason for why. Maybe they just happen to be located in a significant enough area to where it might not be affordable. Maybe it's the size of their company as well, as to why that salary might vary. These are all things that are researchable, though, and that you can kind of interrogate when these offers come. And then lastly, is it worth negotiating over? Because there's times where, hey, maybe you got a better deal than you anticipated. It looks fantastic. If that's the case, is that worth negotiating over? Because if I have an opportunity for a great job at a salary that I didn't anticipate, personally, I'm more than happy to take that and just jump right into that. On the other hand, if it's a job that maybe the salary isn't what you expected, but financially maybe you're struggling or you're desperate for a job, is that also worth negotiating over? Not necessarily. If you have a job, though, and you're comfortable, or let's say financially you're feeling comfortable and you're not necessarily in a rush or you got a few job offers, you could potentially be in the best position that you could be to actually negotiate for salaries and benefits, because you are already in a safe spot to where you can take that kind of confident approach and try and tackle those negotiations. If you do negotiate, the employer could totally respond with just withdrawing the offer. That's not necessarily a guaranteed thing or a thing that can happen. Some employers are just like that, where, hey, you're going to start negotiating, they're just going to pull the offer. You got to confirm to yourself if the negotiation is worth the risk. And again, negotiation isn't just about salary, but it's also about benefits. And it's important to get everything in writing beforehand, because you could go through all these negotiations, have everything up to it, and if you don't have it in writing, you can find yourself on the day of faced with oh, hey, this is not what we talked about, actually. And at that point, it's either you have to accept it because you're in desperate need of a job, or you're walking out. I hope this has been informative. You can check out accompanying modules, and I would highly recommend that you check out other modules within the series. Thank you for your attendance, and good luck on your journey.